Hello, my name is Lucas Harper, 39 years old. I live in Denver, where the mountain fog and city glow always seem to hide tales of heartache. I am a property developer who created everything from nothing after escaping a history filled with suffering. But to explain how I became who I am now, I must take you back to Greenwood, Indiana, the town where I grew up, where memories of a childhood both joyful and painful still visit me in my dreams every night. Greenwood in the 1980s was a quiet community with shaded avenues and warm wooden homes. My family resided in an aged estate where the walls appeared soaked in my mother Sophia's joy and affection. My mother was my guiding star, a lady with a soft grin and arms ever prepared to hold me. She showed me how to make origami birds, how to appreciate the twilight, and to trust that this world, although sometimes cruel, is still brimming with magic. I recall evenings spent with her in the kitchen, surrounded by the scent of warm, baked treats, as she shared fairy tales or hummed songs that I can still recite perfectly today. My father, Michael Harper, was a prosperous property magnate who established Harper Properties. He was frequently absent, but whenever he came back, he always carried little presents for me. A model train, a storybook, or just a firm embrace that made me feel like the most important person alive. But that warmth faded when I was 9 years old. My mother was found to have ovarian cancer, and that merciless illness claimed her in only 18 months. I still remember the day she rested in the hospital room, her gaze dimming, but still attempting to smile at me. "Lucas, you must be brave. All right, I'll always be right here in your spirit." Those were her final words to me before she shut her eyes eternally. My mother's burial is a blurred recollection, as though I was present, but my thoughts were wandering somewhere else. I only recall the noise of folks weeping, the drip of rain on canopies, and the void that felt like the entire universe had crumbled. My father, a man who was always resilient, held me close that day, but I had no idea it would also be the last time I sensed true connection from him. After my mother's passing, my father transformed. He immersed himself in his career as a means to flee the grief, leaving me in that expansive residence with its chilly surfaces. I started to feel like a phantom, quietly gliding through the corridors, seeking a touch of comfort in my mother's mementos, the shawl she once wove, the journal she bequeathed, or the origami birds we crafted together. Then when I was 11, my father introduced Victoria to our home. Victoria was a tall, slim woman with perfectly arranged auburn hair and eyes as piercing as daggers. She arrived at our residence with her 2 kids, Claire and Ethan, like unexpected visitors. My father presented Victoria as my new mom, but from the initial instant, I knew she could never fill my mother's place. Victoria introduced a peculiar vibe. The home, already somber after my mother's departure, now felt even more stifling. She swiftly claimed every area, from reorganizing the family room furnishings to choosing the evening meals. My father, apparently enchanted by her allure, failed to see that I was slowly being sidelined from the family's core. Claire, 3 years my senior, was an arrogant girl with a phony beam. Ethan, 2 years junior, was hostile and enjoyed starting conflicts. From the earliest days, they made me sense that I did not fit in. Claire frequently taunted me, labeling me the forsaken child when my father and Victoria were out of earshot. Ethan liked to shove me or conceal my playthings, chuckling happily whenever I became upset. Victoria not only tolerated, but also promoted Claire and Ethan's actions. She often uttered severe remarks as if my presence was a load. "Lucas, why can't you behave like Claire and Ethan? They are so much more obedient than you." she stated, her pitch sugary but threaded with spite. Once I overheard her informing my father that I was the surplus kid, that I reminded him of my mother, a recollection she desired to wipe away. I attempted to inform my father of what was occurring, but he simply dismissed it, saying I had to adapt to the new household. Victoria is a fine individual. Lucas, you need to allow her space, he mentioned, his gaze fatigued. I did not fully fault him. He was attempting to reconstruct his existence, trying to occupy the emptiness my mother had created. But each time he brushed off my statements, I felt like I was forfeiting a portion of his affection. The following years were a prolonged sequence of agony. At school, I grew introverted and silent. My peers began referring to me as the odd youngster because I often sat by myself, sketching origami birds or jotting in my mother's aged notepad. At home, I tried to evade Victoria and her offspring, but they always discovered methods to injure me. Once when I was 13, Ethan ripped apart an origami bird that my mother and I had created together. I charged at him, tears flowing from fury and hurt. Victoria emerged at that moment, not troubling to inquire what transpired, and struck me firmly across the cheek. "How dare you strike my boy? You rude little pest," she yelled, drawing Ethan into her embrace as if he were the injured party. My father, upon hearing the account, only exhaled and instructed me to express regret. I did not express regret. Instead, I dashed to my chamber, secured the entrance, and wept until no more tears remained. Those injuries accumulated like unseen wounds I bore through my youth. I started to envision a time when I could depart Greenwood, leave Victoria, Claire, and Ethan in the past. I pictured traveling to a distant location where nobody recognized me, where I could commence anew. But at that point, I was merely a 13-year-old lad with no funds, no influence, only origami birds and remembrances of my mother to cling to. One evening, when I was 14, I discovered my mother's journal in an ancient container beneath my bed. Her scripted phrases were like a ray of illumination cutting through the gloom. She wrote about me, about her devotion for me, and her wish that I would mature into a resilient, compassionate gentleman. "My Lucas, you are my greatest treasure. Never permit anyone to cause you to question your value," she inscribed. I perused those phrases repeatedly, as if they were a shielding talisman. The journal became my sanctuary where I vented my rage, my isolation, and my aspirations for liberty. I vowed to my mother and myself that one day I would exit this location. I would not allow Victoria or anybody else to shape me. My concluding years of junior high elapsed in quietness and perseverance. I thrived in academics not to satisfy my father or Victoria, but because I understood learning was my sole escape route. I devoted hours in the library absorbing all I could. From my father's commerce volumes to my mother's exploration tales, I dreamed of a tomorrow where I could rely on myself, where I would not have to submit to anyone. When I was 17, my father started discussing me assuming control of Harper Properties. One day he summoned me to his study, where images of generations of Harpers adorned the walls and spoke about the family heritage. "Lucas, you're the successor. This firm will be yours," he declared, his tone brimming with honor. But I did not feel honored. I felt burden, and part of me pondered if he genuinely desired me to assume control or was merely attempting to compensate for the years he had overlooked me. Victoria, naturally, was not delighted with the notion. I overheard her telling my father that I was not seasoned enough to manage the firm, that Ethan was the one with command traits. Ethan, a 16-year-old who only knew how to intimidate others, was a commander in her view. I was not astonished, but her statements still sliced like a blade. When I was 18, I obtained an admission notice from a college distant from Greenwood. It was the initial glimmer of optimism I had sensed in ages. I knew this was my opportunity to abandon the residence filled with anguish to initiate a fresh existence. I gathered my belongings, taking my mother's journal and a few origami birds, readying for the path forward. The evening before I departed, I stood before the mirror, gazing into my own eyes. I was no longer the 13-year-old boy sobbing over a destroyed origami bird. I was taller, more robust, but deep within, I still bore the anguish of losing my mother, my father's detachment, and the marks left by Victoria, Claire, and Ethan. I promised myself I would not permit the history to determine my tomorrow. I would construct a new existence, one that my mother would admire. And so, I left Greenwood, bearing with me agonizing recollections, but also a strong resolve. I boarded the train, departing the town early one morning when the haze still covered the maple-lined paths. In my satchel, I had only a few garments, my mother's journal, and the faded origami birds. I did not glance back, reluctant to view the residence where I had once felt like an outsider. I was 19, without money, with no relatives to depend on. But I possessed something Victoria, Claire, or Ethan could never seize: optimism. The train carried me to Chicago, where I would start my university life at the University of Chicago. I selected this institution not only for the grant, but also because it was distant enough from Greenwood to allow me to feel like I could inhale. When the train halted at the depot, I stood amid an unknown metropolis, staring at the soaring buildings and the hustling throngs. My heart was both thrilled and fearful. This was my opportunity to begin afresh. But it was also the initial occasion I had to confront the world with nobody supporting me. My dormitory was a tiny, confined space with 2 stacked beds and a wobbly table. My roommate Alex was a Mexican-American fellow with a welcoming grin and a lively tone. "Hey, Lucas, where are you from?" he inquired, as soon as I pulled my luggage into the space. I paused, not wishing to discuss Greenwood or my relatives. "A small community. Nothing remarkable," I answered, and Alex agreed, not probing more. I was thankful for that. The initial days of university were a storm of novel encounters. I was swamped by the courses, the intense sessions, and the pupils around me. They appeared much more assured than I was. I specialized in business management partly because I knew my father wanted me to inherit Harper Properties, but also because I desired to demonstrate I could accomplish something significant without him or anyone else. But university existence was not as simple as I had envisioned. The grant covered fees, but daily costs, meals, texts, and minor items like detergent or dental paste rapidly made me realize I required employment. I was employed as a waiter at a cafe near the campus, where the fragrance of brewed coffee saturated my mornings, and the loud hum of the equipment was like an endless melody. The position consumed most of my leisure time, but it provided me a feeling of independence I had never experienced in Greenwood. Working at the cafe was also where I learned to engage with unfamiliar people. I was inherently reserved, always maintaining distance for fear of being wounded like I was in my youth. But here, I had to beam at patrons, converse with colleagues, and sometimes hear their personal tales. There was an older lady named Margaret who visited the cafe every Thursday, always requesting a cappuccino and reading for hours. One day, she gazed at me and said, "You have sorrowful eyes, but they are filled with resolve. Do not let the history restrain you." All right, I only beamed, but her words struck deeply, awakening the pain I had tried to conceal. Late at night, back in the dormitory, I would sit at my table and open my mother's journal. I wrote in it about everything, from the minor delight of passing an exam to the solitude of observing my classmates phone home, sharing their lives with their families. I did not phone Greenwood. My father phoned a few times, but our discussions were always brief and uncomfortable. "Are you all right, Lucas?" he would ask. "Yes, I am fine," I would respond, even though I was battling every day. I did not want him to know how difficult it was, did not want him to think I was frail. Victoria, naturally, never phoned. I learned from my father that she and her 2 children were still residing with him, that Ethan was gearing up for university and Claire was participating in community groups at school. Those accounts made me feel like an outsider, as if I had never been part of that household. But oddly, their apathy no longer stung as much. I was constructing my own existence, and that was what counted most. University was not just about academics and employment. I began forming new friendships. People who knew nothing about my background. Alex became my nearest companion. He would pull me to view school football matches or to lively student gatherings where I would typically stand in a nook holding a beverage and watching everyone. "You have to relax a bit, Lucas," Alex would say, slapping me on the back. I would grin, but I knew my cautious disposition was not something I could easily discard. One day, in a finance course, I met Emily, a girl with wavy dark hair and eyes that appeared to shine with vitality. She sat beside me, requested to borrow a pencil, and from there we began chatting. Emily was unlike anyone I had ever encountered. She was direct, humorous, but also empathetic. Once, when I casually referenced my mother, she grasped my hand and said, "Losing someone you cherish is the toughest thing, but you are still here, still striving. That is truly commendable." I did not know how to reply, only that for the first time in years, I felt comprehended. Emily and I became companions, then grew nearer. We studied together, remaining in the library until late, dividing packages of snacks and narratives about our ambitions. She aspired to be a reporter to narrate stories that could alter the world. I told her about my ambition of constructing property developments, not just for gain, but to aid neighborhoods, inexpensive residences, eco-friendly spaces, locations people could call their own. Emily always paid attention, and sometimes her look made me believe those ambitions were not so unreachable. But life was not always seamless. Some days I was drained from juggling school employment, and the feelings still brewing from my history. One evening, while working a late period at the cafe, I received a call from my father. His voice was unsteady, unlike his normal self. "Lucas, I want you to come home for the holidays. The family requires you." I felt quiet fury and pain surging within me. Family. What family? The one that pushed me to the edges, that allowed Victoria and her children to torment me. I told him I was occupied, that I had a crucial test and disconnected. But afterward, I sat in a corner of the shop, hands shaking, wondering if I was being too severe on him. That holiday season, I did not return to Greenwood. I remained in Chicago, taking additional shifts to earn funds and evade the void. Alex invited me to his family's residence for supper, and I had a cozy evening with them, people who accepted me like I was one of their kin. But back in the dormitory, I opened my mother's journal and wept. I missed her, missed the holidays when she was living, when the home in Greenwood was filled with merriment. I pondered if I would ever rediscover that sensation again. In my second year, I joined the school's Innovation Society. It was where I learned to convert concepts into actuality, where I met driven and enthusiastic young individuals. I proposed a plan about inexpensive residences inspired by the impoverished districts I had observed in Chicago. My plan was chosen to be showcased at a campus entrepreneurship contest, and for the first time, I felt genuinely worthwhile. The evening before the showcase, I stayed awake rehearsing in front of the mirror, picturing my mother sitting there beaming at me. The showcase was a triumph beyond my anticipations. My group secured third place, and a lecturer invited me to assist in research for an initiative on eco-friendly city growth. That was a pivotal moment in my life. I began to trust I could achieve something, that I was not just the lad displaced by his stepfamily. But the happiness did not endure long. One day, I received a message from Greenwood. Not from my father, but from Victoria. The message was concise, frigid, notifying me that my father desired me to employment at Harper Properties after completion. Michael thinks you have capability, though I am not convinced. She composed. I shredded the message, furious enough to want to yell. Victoria, who never viewed me as kin, now sought to dominate my tomorrow. I resolved I would not go back to Greenwood, would not labor for Harper Properties. I would create my own route. My concluding university years passed swifter than I anticipated. I accepted more positions, from serving tables to mentoring newcomers. I conserved every cent, not from miserliness, but because I desired a safeguard so I would never have to rely on anyone. Emily remained by my side as a companion, a trusted advisor, and sometimes I wondered if I was beginning to sense something profound for her. But I was not prepared to unlock my heart. The darkness of my history was still too vast. At commencement, I stood in the hall observing families cheer their dear ones. My father did not attend. He dispatched a congratulatory note with a payment I never utilized. I was not furious, not precisely. I was just sorrowful, knowing the gap between us had expanded too broad, and I was uncertain it could be connected. I departed Chicago with a business management credential and a grand aspiration. I envisioned myself heading to a fresh metropolis, perhaps Denver or San Francisco, where I could initiate my property career on my own conditions, constructing inexpensive residences, sustainable neighborhoods, places people could call home. But life, as my mother once stated, has a method of compelling us to confront the things we attempt to flee. Just a few months after commencement, a call from my father drew me back to Greenwood, the location I vowed I would never revisit. It was a stormy afternoon, and I was sitting in my modest Chicago flat, examining job proposals from a few new ventures. The phone sounded, and my father's voice emerged low but heavy with immediacy. "Lucas, I need you to come home. Harper Properties needs you." I fell quiet, my hand clutching the device firmly. Home was where Victoria labeled me a load, where Claire and Ethan turned me into a mockery. But my father's pitch left no space for denial. "This is the family heritage. Lucas, you are the successor." "I am not becoming younger," he said, and I could detect the weariness in his words. I desired to decline, to shout that I did not require Harper Properties, that I could succeed independently. But a portion of me, the portion that still yearned for his endorsement, hesitated. I considered the occasions he informed me about the firm, the images in his study, the heritage he and the ancestors before him had constructed. I pondered if this was my chance to demonstrate I was not the disappointment Victoria always asserted I was. So, against every impulse, I consented. I packed my items, bid farewell to Chicago, assured Emily I would stay connected, and returned to Greenwood. As the train passed the Welcome to Greenwood, Indiana marker, my stomach twisted. The old residence appeared before me, still majestic, but as cold as I recalled. Victoria stood at the entrance, her artificial smile fixed. "Lucas, it has been so long," she said, her voice saccharine. I nodded, uttered nothing, and entered, feeling like a weary wanderer misplaced in a strange territory. Harper Properties was situated in the center of Greenwood, a 4-story structure with a shining metal exterior. My father welcomed me in his study, offering me a short, uncomfortable embrace. "You have matured so much," he said, his eyes shaded with melancholy. I desired to inquire why he did not attend my commencement, why he permitted Victoria to dominate our household. But I restrained myself. I knew I was not here to reopen ancient injuries, but to labor. He presented me to the personnel, calling me the one who will assume the firm someday. I observed doubtful glances from a few, particularly from Ethan, now a 24-year-old, with a conceited smirk. He labored in the initiative expansion section, a role I suspected Victoria had orchestrated. Claire, now a fashionable 27-year-old, managed community outreach. Victoria, naturally, had no formal position, but was present at every gathering, like a silhouette manipulating from the shadows. My role began as a junior initiative coordinator, a way for my father to evaluate me, as he expressed it. But I swiftly realized it was Victoria's plot. She and Ethan desired to keep me under their control, simple to manage as they schemed for authority in the firm. They allocated me trivial duties, verifying documents, composing summaries, even fetching supplies as if I were a trainee, not the leader's son. I clenched my jaw and persevered, determined to prove I was not worthless. I devoted hours examining the firm's initiatives, perusing every record I could locate. Harper Properties had once been an innovative company, constructing inexpensive residences and neighborhood hubs. But under Victoria's sway, it had shifted toward upscale ventures, premium apartments, retail centers, things that generated high revenues. I viewed this as a disloyalty of what my father had instructed me, a disloyalty of Harper Properties' enduring purpose. It also contradicted my aspirations. I began proposing concepts in gatherings. I discussed constructing inexpensive residences, employing green materials, and investing in Greenwood's overlooked neighborhoods. A few seasoned workers backed my concepts, but Victoria and Ethan always rejected them. "Lucas, you are youthful. You do not comprehend the industry," Ethan said patronizingly. Victoria would grin and say things like, "Pleasant concept, but it is not feasible. We need to consider earnings." My father, who should have supported me, just sat quietly, his stare distant. His quietness hurt more than Victoria's jabs. I desired him to voice up, to protect me like he did when I was a youngster. But he did not. I started to question whether he truly desired me to assume the firm, or if he had only summoned me back out of remorse. Strains reached a peak during a gathering about a fresh initiative, a premium retreat Ethan and Victoria were advocating. It necessitated raising an aged district where hundreds of households resided. I could not remain silent. I rose, my voice quivering but steadfast, and offered an alternate strategy: restore the district, construct inexpensive residences, and generate employment for residents. "This is not just about revenue," I said. "It is about our duty to the community." The space became quiet. I looked at my father, hoping he would endorse me, but he only sighed and said, "Lucas, you are too idealistic. Ethan's initiative is already sanctioned. We cannot alter it now." His words cut like a dagger. Ethan smirked. Victoria applauded as if she had just observed a performance. My blood surged, but I said nothing. I seized my files and exited the gathering, the door closing firmly behind me. That evening, I sat in my old chamber gazing at the origami birds suspended on the wall. I phoned Emily, the only individual I felt could comprehend me. I do not belong here. Emily, I said, my voice faltering. I tried, but they do not need me. She listened, then said, Lucas, you do not need to prove anything to them. You are you, and that is sufficient. Her words soothed me, but they could not erase the pain of betrayal. I began contemplating leaving Greenwood. I did not want to exist in Victoria's shadow or labor for a firm that opposed my principles. But part of me still desired to remain, to rescue Harper Properties, to reclaim the heritage my father and his forebears had built. I was divided between devotion to my father and the yearning for independence. One morning, I went to the office early, hoping to speak to my father privately. I knocked on his door, but there was no response. I pushed it open and found him slumped over his desk, clutching an old photo of my mother. I froze, uncertain what to do. He looked up, his eyes weary. Lucas, he said, his voice. I am sorry. I have not been the father you merited. For the first time in years, I saw my father so exposed. I desired to embrace him, to say I pardoned him. But I could not. Too much anguish had accumulated. I only nodded and left the space carrying a blend of hurt and optimism. Maybe deep down, the father who once cherished me was still there. But that optimism did not last. In another gathering, Ethan openly critiqued me in front of the staff, calling my ideas immature. Victoria laughed, and my father remained silent. I could not endure it anymore. I stood up, looked directly at my father, and said, If this is how you want to operate the firm, I do not belong here. I walked out, ignoring the gazes following me. That evening, I packed my things, resolved to depart Greenwood. I did not know where I would go, but I knew I could not stay. I wrote a letter to my father saying I was not furious, but needed to discover my own route. I left it on his desk and left Greenwood at dawn, carrying both pain and a sense of release. I drove without direction, unsure of what I was seeking or where I would arrive. I just kept moving, driving, resting, then driving again, as if evading the past was sufficient. After nearly 2 weeks wandering roadways, sleeping in unfamiliar, dilapidated inns, I decided my destination would be Denver. That would be where I would begin authoring my own narrative. I chose Denver for a straightforward reason. It was on the opposite side of the nation, as distant from Greenwood as I could get. I had no definite scheme, no links, no position awaiting. Just a business management credential, a few thousand in reserves, and a fervent dream to construct sustainable neighborhoods. When I stepped into downtown Denver, I inhaled the crisp mountain air mixed with the aroma of coffee from small sidewalk bistros. This city, with its high rises and sudden showers, seemed to pledge a new beginning. The first days in Denver were a trial. I leased a small, moist room in Highland Park where the walls flaked and the sound of traffic resounded through the night. My reserves diminished faster than I expected, and I had to find work right away. I secured a job as an aide at a modest property firm called Eco Vista, which concentrated on inexpensive housing initiatives. The labor was not glamorous. I mostly managed documents, responded to calls, and ran tasks, but it gave me a chance to learn from individuals truly enthusiastic about altering neighborhoods. The firm's owner, Henry Clark, was a sturdy man in his 60s. He was broad and solid with keen eyes, but a warm, approachable smile. He noticed my diligence and often sought my opinion in gatherings, even though I was just a fresh worker. Once, when I proposed converting a deserted plot into a neighborhood garden, he nodded and said, "You have foresight, Lucas. Do not let anyone cause you to doubt that." His words reminded me of my mother, of the lines in her journal, and I felt a wave of strength emerge within me. But life in Denver was not always simple. Some nights I lay on my squeaky bed, staring at the fractured ceiling, wondering if I was on the correct path. I missed Emily, our late-night study meetings in the library, her comforting voice. We maintained contact by phone, but the separation and hectic routines made our talks less regular. "I am proud of you, Lucas," she said during one call, "but do not forget to take time for yourself." Okay, I smiled, promised I would. But deep down I knew I was competing against myself, trying to prove I did not need Greenwood or Harper Properties. My first year in Denver, I labored without cease. I learned to assess property markets, bargain with builders, and cooperate with community groups. Eco Vista was not as large as Harper Properties, but here I felt appreciated. I started working on a significant initiative, building inexpensive housing for modest-income families. I spent hours investigating designs, sourcing green materials, and collaborating with city designers. When the initiative was finished, seeing families settle into their new homes brought a delight I had never felt in Greenwood. But achievement did not come effortlessly. Some days I worked to fatigue, dozing at my table amid stacks of papers. There were times investors dismissed me, calling me too visionary for discussing sustainable progress. Once a key investor looked at me and said, "You are young, Lucas. The market does not care about aspirations. It cares about funds." I smiled, but inside I was enraged. I did not want to become someone who pursued revenues at any expense, like Victoria and Ethan had done with Harper Properties. To sustain myself, I took a side job at a tavern on weekends. The work was demanding with late hours and inebriated customers, but it taught me endurance and how to manage stress. One night, while cleaning the bar, I overheard a patron discuss his father, a man who had deserted his family for career. The tale made me think of my father, of the letter I had left on his desk. I wondered if he had read it, if he thought of me. But I quickly dismissed the notion. I could not let the history drag me back. In my second year in Denver, I began to establish a reputation. Eco Vista's inexpensive housing initiative attracted local press, and my name appeared in an article titled, "Young Visionary Reshaping Denver's Horizon." Henry summoned me to his office, patted my shoulder, and said, "You are doing excellent, Lucas. But this is just the start." He offered me the opportunity to head a new, bigger initiative, a development combining residences, a garden, and a neighborhood hub. I agreed, knowing it would be my largest challenge yet. After nearly 4 years of unyielding labor, the development was finally completed. On the opening day, I stood in the new garden watching children frolic and families share laughter, and I felt tears rising. I thought of my mother, the origami birds, her words urging me never to doubt my value. I had accomplished it. Not with Harper Properties, not with my father's assistance, but on my own. But life has a way of drawing you back to where you began. One morning, as I prepared for a gathering, my phone rang. An unknown woman's voice introduced herself as a caregiver who had tended to my father in his last days. "Mr. Michael passed away. Mr. Harper," she said, her voice quivering. "I need to meet you. There are things you need to know." My heart seemed to halt. My father was gone. Why had nobody informed me, and what secrets was she referring to? I paused everything and reserved a flight to Greenwood. I did not know what I would confront, but I knew the history, despite my efforts to escape it, was summoning me back. I gazed out the window, observing snowfall on Denver's streets, and told myself that no matter what occurred, I would not let anyone demolish what I had constructed. The snow fell gently on Greenwood streets as I set foot in the town after nearly 6 years away. I did not go to the residence, but headed directly to Greenwood Memorial Home, located at the end of Elm Avenue. It was a modest building with gray walls and tinted glass doors. As I entered, the aroma of roses struck me, blending with the coolness of the climate control. I saw a few known faces, longtime Harper Properties workers, some former neighbors, but nobody dared meet my gaze. They murmured, their looks diverted, as if I were a specter from the past. Then I saw them, Victoria, Claire, and Ethan, standing in a corner near my father's coffin. Victoria, now in her 60s, still upheld her refined look with carefully styled auburn hair and a sophisticated black gown. Claire, her face thickly painted, was conversing with a man I did not recognize. Ethan, taller than I recalled, stood with his arms folded, his eyes cold and defiant. They did not notice me at first, but when I approached, all three turned, and the room's atmosphere seemed to solidify. Lucas. Victoria spoke first, her voice cloying, but sharp with barbs. What are you doing here? The way she addressed me, as if I were an intruder, made my blood surge. I took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. I am here to bid farewell to my father, I said, my voice steady but resolute. I have every right to be here. Victoria, she sneered, stepping nearer, her boots clicking on the tile floor. Right. You deserted Michael, deserted this family. You think you can appear here like some savior? She glanced at Claire and Ethan as if seeking their backing. Claire nodded, and Ethan advanced, sizing me up. You are here to claim the estate. Are you not? Ethan said, his tone belittling. Do not pretend to mourn. Dad did not need you, and neither do we. I tightened my fists, struggling to suppress my rage. I desired to shout that I never cared about my father's riches, that I just wanted to see him one final time. But I knew disputing with them was futile. They had constructed a story in their minds where I was the disloyal one, the avaricious one. I looked beyond Ethan to the mahogany coffin in the room's center, covered in white blooms. My father lay there, and I was not prepared to face the reality that he was gone eternally. I am not here to quarrel, I said, stepping past Ethan toward the coffin. But Victoria obstructed my path, her palm pressing against my chest, her eyes piercing as blades. You are not permitted near him, she said, her voice low but menacing. Michael was my spouse, the father of Claire and Ethan. You are no longer family. Her words stabbed my heart like a sword. I looked at her, then at Claire and Ethan, who stood behind her with smirks. I desired to shove her aside, to yell that I was my father's son, that nobody could prevent me from bidding farewell to him. But I saw the spectators' eyes, curiosity, sympathy, and knew that creating a disturbance would only confirm their beliefs about me. Victoria, I said, my voice calm but frosty. You do not get to decide who my father's family is. I am staying, and I will oversee this burial. If you want to halt me, contact the authorities. But I caution you, I know my lawful rights. She stiffened, clearly not anticipating such a determined reply. Ethan stepped forward, about to utter something, but Victoria raised a hand to stop him. Fine, Lucas, she said, her smile returning but infused with poison. You can remain, But do not think you will receive anything from Michael. He left everything to us. I did not respond. I did not care about the estate or Harper properties, and I just wanted to bid farewell to my father, to stand by him one last time. I stepped past Victoria to the coffin. My father lay there, his face thin, his eyes closed as if resting. My throat constricted, tears threatening to flow. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered, my hand gently touching the coffin's rim. "I was not here when you needed me." The next few hours passed like a vision. I assumed control of the burial despite the icy stares from Victoria and her children. I selected a melody my father adored. "How Great Thou Art," the one my mother used to hum to me. I composed a brief tribute speaking of memories from my youth when my father was the man who held me near and shared his aspirations with me. I did not mention Victoria or the years of separation. I just wanted people to recall my father as I did. But Victoria would not let me have tranquility. Throughout the burial, she murmured to Claire and Ethan, pointing at me as if I were an invader. When I stood to deliver the tribute, Ethan cleared his throat loudly, deliberately interrupting me. A few individuals turned to look, but I did not halt. I continued, my voice quivering, but determined. And when I concluded, I saw a few of Harper Properties' veteran workers nod, their eyes moist. They comprehended. They knew who my father truly was. After the burial, as people started to depart, Victoria pulled me aside. "You think you are clever, do you not?" she said, her voice low but poisonous. "You can stand here feigning grief, but do not dream of taking anything from Michael. His will is composed, and your name is not in it." I looked at her, more fatigued than furious. "I do not care about the will, Victoria," I said. "I came here for my father, not for funds." She scoffed, as if she did not believe me, then turned away, pulling Claire and Ethan with her. That evening, I stayed at a small inn on the outskirts of Greenwood. I could not bear to sleep in the old residence, where every corner evoked memories of painful days. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to remember my father's face in the coffin. I wondered if he knew how hard I had striven, if he knew I still cherished him despite everything. The next morning, as I prepared to leave Greenwood, a woman appeared in the inn lobby. She wore a soft blue jacket, her hair pulled up, and her eyes filled with concern. "Mr. Harper?" she asked, her voice gentle but assured. "I am the one who called you. I was your father's caregiver." My heart pounded. "Who are you?" I inquired, trying to stay composed. "And what do you need to tell me about my father?" She glanced around, as if fearful someone might overhear, then handed me a thick packet. "This is what Mr. Michael wanted me to give you," she said. "But you need to be cautious. There are individuals who do not want you to know the truth." I took the packet, feeling its weight like it carried the universe. I desired to open it immediately, but the caregiver's anxious expression stopped me. "Read it somewhere secure," she said, then turned and disappeared into the crowd on Greenwood streets. I returned to my room, locked the door, and opened the packet. Inside was a handwritten note from my father, along with a certified estate document. I read the first lines, and my heart seemed to cease. "Lucas, my son, I am sorry for everything. I allowed you to endure so much anguish. This is the truth I want you to know." My father's unsteady handwriting was like a blade, both painful and revealing. His note was lengthy, filled with regret and secrets he had kept concealed in his concluding years. He wrote that after my mother's death, he descended into a profound chasm of sorrow. and Victoria appeared as a refuge. He thought she would bring steadiness to the family, but he was mistaken. Victoria was not the woman I believed she was. He wrote, "She controlled me, Lucas, and I was too feeble to perceive it." He disclosed that Victoria managed all his interactions, messages, calls, preventing him from contacting me or even knowing my location. She informed him I despised him, that I had severed ties because I no longer wished to be his son. I stopped reading, tears obscuring the page. I recalled those brief, uncomfortable calls from my father when I was in university. The way he would ask, "Are you all right?" with a tired voice. I had thought he did not care. But now I knew the reality. Victoria had erected a barrier between us. She had supplied him with falsehoods, making him believe I was the disloyal one. The note continued to reveal disturbing details. My father wrote that Victoria and Ethan had urged him to compose a estate document that omitted me from all possessions, including his portions in Harper Properties. They made me feel like an unsuccessful parent. He wrote, "I permitted them to dominate me, Lucas. But in my final months, I tried to rectify things. By the time you read this, I may no longer be here, but I have prepared a new estate document. All my possessions, the residence, vehicles, boat, equestrian facility, and my shares in Harper Properties, I leave to you to determine their destiny. You are the only one I trust to continue the family heritage. I hope you can pardon me." Besides the note, the packet contained other papers, messages, memos, and sound files my father had secretly preserved. One was a dialogue between Victoria and a man named Robert Hale, a rival of Harper Properties. In it, Victoria vowed to sell vital firm assets to Hale at a reduced cost in exchange for a substantial amount transferred to her private account. I listened to the file. Victoria's voice, frigid and scheming, as if Harper Properties, my father's lifelong aspiration, was just a product for her to gain from. "Michael will never discover," she told Hale. "He is fading, and that pest, Lucas, is long departed." The truth left me shaking with fury and deep grief. My father had known the reality, had tried to amend, but he lacked time. I thought of the years I had blamed him, the times I refused to phone home, and my heart felt like it was fragmenting. But I also knew now was not the time to submerge in sorrow. I had to proceed not just for my father, but for myself to safeguard his heritage and reveal Victoria's manipulation. The next day, I contacted Frederick Ross, my father's longtime attorney who had collaborated with Harper Properties since before I was born. Mr. Ross was a tall, slender man with gray hair, sharp but compassionate eyes. I met him at his compact office in downtown Greenwood, where piles of documents reached the roof. When I handed him my father's packet, he read the note and estate document, his demeanor becoming serious. "Lucas," he said, his voice low, "these are vital papers. If what you say is accurate, Victoria and Ethan have committed grave deceit." Mr. Ross explained that the counterfeit estate document Victoria presented after the burial could be reversed if we proved the authenticity of the genuine one. He also said the file of Victoria's dialogue with Robert Hale could serve as proof in a legal or even penal case if necessary. I nodded, knowing this battle would not be simple, but I was no longer the 13-year-old boy Victoria called a load. I had built my own profession in Denver, faced obstacles I never thought I could surmount. I would not let Victoria pilfer my father's heritage or let her succeed. Victoria, detecting the danger, began circulating rumors around Greenwood. She told everyone I had returned to seize the estate, depicting me as an exploiter capitalizing on my father's passing. Some former neighbors who had known me as a child looked at me with doubt. But I did not care. I knew the truth, and I had the evidence in my possession. I phoned Henry, my supervisor at Ico Vista, and requested 3 more weeks of absence. I need to remain in Greenwood to manage the burial and some family issues. Henry, I said, trying to keep my voice stable. With his usual comprehension, he consented immediately. Take care of your family. Lucas, I will manage things here, he said, and I felt a slight relief. I began subtly monitoring Victoria's activities. Each morning, I left the inn early, leased an old vehicle to avoid recognition, and quietly watched the family's old residence. Victoria still resided there with Claire and Ethan, as if my father's passing had no effect on them. I saw them entering and exiting, sometimes chuckling as if nothing had transpired, and it made my blood surge. My father had devoted his life to building Harper Properties, and now they were trying to appropriate his heritage. About 10 days after the burial, I noticed something unusual. One afternoon, I saw Victoria, Claire, and Ethan leave the residence together in a sleek silver SUV. They were attired formally, as if readying for a crucial gathering. I followed, maintaining sufficient distance to avoid detection. Their vehicle stopped in front of an office structure in downtown Greenwood, where a sign read, Thompson and Associates Law Firm. My heart raced. I was nearly certain they were there to handle the estate document. I parked on a side road, observing from afar. Victoria strode into the office with assurance, Claire and Ethan following. I called Mr. Ross and told him to meet me at Thompson and Associates' office. Mr. Ross was silent for a moment before replying, Lucas, I know that firm. They specialize in managing large estates. If Victoria is there, she might be trying to validate the counterfeit estate document. Do you have the real estate document with you? Yes, I replied, my hand gripping the packet in my coat pocket. I always carry it. Good, Mr. Ross said. I will be there in 20 minutes. We will enter and resolve this. I waited for Mr. Ross in the vehicle, my heart thumping. I thought of my father, his unsteady handwriting in the note, the way he apologized for the anguish I had endured. I could not let Victoria prevail, could not let her take what my father intended for me. When Mr. Ross arrived, dressed in a charcoal suit and carrying a portfolio, I felt a spark of assurance return. Let us proceed. Lucas, he said, his eyes keen. We will conclude this. We entered Thompson and Associates' office, where the air was cool and smelled of aged documents. The front desk worker looked up, slightly surprised by our presence. We need to see Mr. Thompson, Mr. Ross said, his tone commanding. It is regarding Michael Harper's estate document. The front desk worker hesitated, but after a quick call, guided us to a small conference space. Victoria, Claire, and Ethan were already there, seated around a long table with Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged man with silver-framed glasses and a strict demeanor. When Victoria saw me and Mr. Ross, she jumped to her feet, her face draining of color. What are you doing here, Lucas? She shouted, her voice cracking. Sit down. Mrs. Harper, Mr. Ross said, his tone composed but firm. He turned to Mr. Thompson, presenting the genuine estate document in my father's note. I am the lawyer representing Lucas Harper, the legitimate successor of Michael Harper. We have evidence that the estate document Mrs. Victoria presented is fraudulent. The space fell silent. Mr. Thompson took the papers, his demeanor becoming more solemn as he read. Victoria tried to interrupt, her voice quivering. It is false. Lucas is trying to mislead us all. I stepped forward, locking eyes with Victoria. You manipulated my father. Victoria, I said, my voice low but potent. You prevented him from contacting me, compelled him to write a counterfeit estate document. And now you are trying to sell Harper Properties assets to Robert Hale. I have proof. The file, messages, everything. Ethan, sitting nearby, turned crimson, glaring at me like a trapped beast. He stood suddenly, his chair falling to the floor. Lucas, you dare to, before he could finish. Mr. Thompson looked up, his gaze cold. Mrs. Harper, Ethan, these are very grave claims. If these papers are confirmed, you could face serious legal or even criminal penalties. Victoria collapsed into her chair, her face pale. Ethan tried to speak, but his voice weakened, and Claire began to sob. I looked at them, feeling not victory, but a profound sadness. They had possessed everything. The residence, the funds, my father's safeguard, but their avarice drove them to seize what was not theirs. I took a deep breath and said, Mr. Thompson, I do not want to prosecute them. I just want fairness for my father. I demand that Victoria, Claire, and Ethan vacate my family's home immediately and never return to Greenwood. If they consent, I will not pursue additional measures. Victoria stared at me, her eyes a mixture of astonishment and loathing. You think you are so honorable, she hissed. But Mr. Ross raised a hand, interrupting her. Mrs. Victoria, I recommend you accept Lucas's proposal, he said. If this goes to tribunal, you will lose far more than a residence. After a strained silence, Victoria nodded, her lips pressed firmly. Claire and Ethan said nothing, heads lowered as they followed their mother out of the space. Mr. Thompson vowed to confirm the papers and ensure the genuine estate document was carried out. As the door closed behind them, I felt as if a burden had been removed, but it left a void in my heart. I had won. I had obtained fairness for my father, but the price was years of separation, words unspoken, and a family I had once hoped to repair now shattered eternally. I remained in Greenwood for another 10 days to conclude the matters related to the estate document. Mr. Ross labored tirelessly, ensuring that all of my father's possessions from Harper Properties to the family residence were legally conveyed to me. Victoria, as I had required, left the residence the next day. Claire and Ethan resigned from the firm and departed a few days later. I heard they relocated to another metropolis, possibly Atlanta, where Victoria had kin. I did not care where they went, only hoping they would never return to Greenwood or attempt to interfere in my life again. The old residence was now mine, but I did not want to reside there. It contained too many memories, both pleasant and agonizing. I decided to convert it into a neighborhood hub, a place where Greenwood's youngsters could come to study, enjoy, and aspire. As my mother had once motivated me to do, I employed a crew to refurbish the residence, maintaining its classic appeal while adding contemporary areas, a modest library, a creative space, and a yard where I placed a small figure of an origami bird in memory of my mother. Harper Properties was a greater challenge. Under Victoria's influence, the firm had deviated from my father's initial vision. Upscale initiatives, questionable agreements with Robert Hale, and a lack of financial clarity had damaged its standing. I knew restoring it would not be easy, but I was resolved to do so, not just for my father, but for the principles I held dear. I returned to Denver to conclude my labor at Eco Vista, but I knew I would need to devote considerable time in Greenwood to revive Harper Properties. Henry, my esteemed supervisor, supported my choice. You have a chance to do something remarkable. Lucas, he said, make that firm something your father would admire. I nodded, feeling the weight of accountability, but also a surge of drive. In the months that followed, I divided my time between Denver and Greenwood. I collaborated with Harper Properties' seasoned workers, those who had been with my father from the initial days. They shared tales of the firm's prosperous years when my father was youthful, enthusiastic, and always prioritized the community first. Those tales inspired me, helping me develop a new strategy, concentrate on inexpensive residences, sustainable initiatives, and aid for struggling families in Greenwood. One of the initial initiatives I launched was the redevelopment of the aged district Ethan and Victoria had wanted to demolish for a premium retreat. I partnered with charitable groups using Harper Properties resources to build suitable homes, a neighborhood garden, and a skills training center. When the initiative was completed, seeing families settle into their new homes felt like fulfilling a vow to my father and to my mother. As Harper Properties began to regain drive, I felt I was advancing my father's heritage in my own manner. The firm was not just an enterprise. It was a tool to generate positive transformation, as my mother had taught me about compassion and duty. I hung an origami bird in my office right beside my father's image as a reminder of what had brought me here. My story does not conclude with my triumph over Victoria or inheriting Harper Properties. It concludes with a lesson I learned through years of anguish and effort. A true heritage is not just about possessions, but about reality, fairness, and accountability to the community. I pardoned my father, not because he merited it, but because I needed to release to advance. I learned not to let controllers like Victoria define me, and I treasured the principles my mother and father bequeathed: endurance, compassion, and belief in an improved world. Greenwood was no longer a place that confined me. It was where I rediscovered myself and built a new heritage, not just for my father, but for the generations to follow.